Hello and welcome to this edition of Arirang Special. I'm Min Son-hee. It's 1:50 a.m. Thursday, April 27th here in Capitol Seoul, and we are carrying live details of the summit between President Yoon Suk-yeol and U.S. President Joe Biden over at the White House. First up then, I have our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon standing by live in Washington, D.C. with the latest thus far, including the welcoming ceremony on the grounds of the South Lawn. Do-yeon, welcome. Do-yeon, can you hear me?
Well, good afternoon, Sunny from... Sunny, good afternoon from Washington, D.C. As you can see, I'm standing in front of the White House and I'm by the South Lawn side where the opening ceremony was held. And it's a beautiful day for a welcoming ceremony for President Yoon. And you can... the arrival ceremony actually lasted around 30 minutes, and we saw soldiers lined up with blank artillery shots fired, and a lot of Korean Americans that have been invited welcoming President Yoon at the South Lawn. Now, this of course is a full-scale welcoming protocol because it's a state visit, and it happens to be only the second time President Biden has invited for another leader for a state visit, and Washington is showing efforts to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the two countries' alliance amid growing uncertainties in the global community. Now, take a listen to what the two leaders had to say as they arrived, as President Yoon arrived at the White House.
한미 동맹은 세계의 자유와 평화, 번영을 위한 글로벌 동맹입니다. 한미 동맹은 미래로 나아가는 동맹이고 행동하는 동맹입니다. 저는 동맹의 70년 역사를 되돌아보고 동맹의 미래를 함께 설계하기 위해 여기 왔습니다.
Mr. President, ours is a future filled with unimaginable opportunity and endless possibility. Nothing is beyond our ability to reach when our nations and our people stand united. We have proven that time and again over the last 70 years.
Right, indeed. And moving forward, Do-yeon, I understand we're waiting for a joint declaration detailing deterrence efforts to ensure security on the Korean Peninsula amid North Korea's nuclear brinkmanship. What do we know thus far?
Right, Sunny. Even before President Yoon left Seoul, it was widely expected that the two leaders would discuss and agree on stronger measures against North Korea's nuclear threats and increased missile provocations. Now, according to Seoul's top office's spokesperson, South Korea and the U.S. will be signing and revealing a joint declaration called the Washington Declaration. Now, some bits and pieces have already been announced. For example, a new mechanism called the Nuclear Consultative Group will be created, which will enable the joint nuclear sharing, planning, and execution procedures to run smoothly. Local media has also been reporting actively on what's to expect as well, and some quoted a senior White House official saying there's an agreement on regular deployment of strategic assets in the region, including the first visit of a nuclear ballistic missile submarine to South Korea since the 1980s. Now, that could spur some reaction by North Korea, but we have to wait on what the exact wordings will be as we wait for the joint declaration by the two leaders, along with the joint press conference that both the reporters from both sides will have the chance to address the president for additional questions. Now, that's all I got for now. Back to you, Sunny.
Right, Do-yeon, thank you for that update. That was our correspondent Kim Do-yeon, who is part of the presidential press corps covering President Yoon's current state visit to the U.S. Now, while we wait for the joint press briefing to commence, we share a few words with our panel of scholars on Seoul-Washington ties and more. I have Professor Min Jung-hoon from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy here in the studio with me. Professor Min, it's a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure.
I also have Professor Eric Kim from the Ulsan National Institute of Science and Technology with us as well. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Right, now before we start our panel session though, let's take a listen to the opening remarks shared by President Yoon Suk-yeol and U.S. President Joe Biden ahead of their summit exchange at the White House.
Mr. President, my friend, we're honored to celebrate with you the 70th anniversary of our alliance with you, with Korea. And President Eisenhower said all those years ago, he said, quote, security of an individual nation in a free world depends upon the security of its partners. And today, I'm proud to say, Mr. President, I think that our partnership is ready to take on any challenges we may face. We see it in the Indo-Pacific, where our alliance is the linchpin of regional security and prosperity. And we see it in the Indo-Pacific, where our alliance is the linchpin of that security, and we see it in our defense of democratic values, from the ROK leading the next Summit for Democracy, to our shared commitment to stand with Ukraine as it defends its democracy against Russia's assault. And we also see it in the way we're doubling down on our cooperation as allies, even as the DPRK ramps up its challenges. And we see it in our growing economic cooperation. ROK businesses are investing billions in the United States, and together we're building the future. Everything from electric vehicles and batteries to solar power to semiconductors. Mr. President, I want to thank you and your courageous principled diplomacy with Japan, which strengthened our trilateral partnership. It makes an enormous difference. I'm looking forward to our meeting today, and most importantly, I'm looking forward to the future our countries will forge together. Thank you for being here.
바이든 대통령님 따뜻하게 환대해 주셔서 감사합니다. 역대 미국 대통령들이 건국의 아버지들이 만든 이 헌법의 정신을 구현하기 위해 끊임없이 고민했던 이 집무실에서 바이든 대통령님과 회담을 갖게 돼서 뜻깊게 생각합니다.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your warm welcome once again. It is indeed meaningful for me to talk to you here at the Oval Office. This is the very place where the presidents of the United States strive to realize a nation that embodies the spirit of the Constitution written by the founding fathers.
이곳 오벌 오피스에서 대한민국에 관한 많은 중요한 결정들도 이루어졌을 것입니다. 오늘 제가 이 자리에 이렇게 있게 된 것도 그러한 역사와 과정의 결과가 아닐까 생각합니다.
I suppose that many important decisions regarding the Republic of Korea were also made at this office. I believe I was only able to be here today as a consequence of all those moments of history.
지난 70년간 한미 동맹이 걸어온 발자취는 앞선 지도자들의 판단과 결정이 현명하고 옳았음을 보여주고 있습니다.
The journey of the ROK-U.S. alliance over the past 70 years proves that our predecessors' decisions were right and wise.
한국은 전쟁의 폐허 속에서 국제적 위상을 가진 국가로 성장했으며 한미 동맹은 한반도뿐만 아니라 글로벌 평화와 안정의 핵심 축이 됐습니다.
Korea rose from the ashes of war and has become one of the leading countries of the international community. Now the ROK-U.S. alliance is not only the linchpin of peace and stability on the Korean peninsula, but also across the globe.
한미 동맹은 자유민주주의라는 보편적 가치에 기반한 가치 동맹입니다. 이익에 따라서 만나고 헤어지는 편의적인 계약 관계가 아닙니다. 가치에 기반해서 영원히 지속되는 동맹입니다. 서로 생각이 다른 어떤 현안에 대해서도 협의를 통해 충분히 문제를 풀어나갈 수 있는 회복력이 강한 동맹입니다.
Mr. President, our alliance is an alliance of values based on our shared universal values of freedom and democracy. It is not a contractual relationship of convenience only seeking for interest. Guided by our shared values, our alliance is everlasting partnership. The ROK-U.S. alliance is also resilient. Together we can resolve any issues between us through close consultations.
이런 가치에 기반한 동맹이기 때문에 한미 동맹이 글로벌 동맹으로 발전할 수 있는 것입니다.
This is the reason that the ROK-U.S. alliance is now transforming into a true global alliance.
힘에 의한 현상 변경 시도, 또 공급망의 분절과 교란, 식량과 에너지 안보 문제 등으로 세계의 평화와 안전이 도전받고 위협받고 있습니다.
Mr. President, attempts to alter status quo by force, supply chain fragmentation and disruption, challenges in food and energy security are threatening global peace and stability.
가치 동맹인 한미 동맹이 세계 평화와 번영을 위협하는 이 위기를 극복해 나가는데 핵심적인 역할을 할 수 있습니다.
As a value alliance, we can together play a critical role in navigating through all these challenges, Mr. President.
오늘 바이든 대통령과의 정상회담은 한미 동맹이 세계 평화와 번영을 위한 글로벌 동맹으로 새 출발하는 역사적 이정표가 될 것입니다.
Mr. President, our summit talks today will set a historic milestone for the alliance, marching anew toward the peace and prosperity of the world as a global alliance.
Thank you all.
Right, and those were the opening remarks by the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. right before the summit. Now, Professor Min, let's expand upon the issues touched upon by the two leaders. They both mentioned the presence of challenges facing global stability. And that being said, among the key issues that will be addressed, that has been addressed, that will be in today's summit is enhanced U.S. nuclear assurances for South Korea. First of all, Professor Min, do you believe that South Koreans in general are losing faith in America's nuclear umbrella? And if so, how do you explain this reality?
Well, it's not easy to say that South Koreans is losing faith in the United States nuclear umbrella because, according to the public polls, it still shows that most South Koreans believe that the ROK-U.S. alliance is still strong, and they truly rely on the South Korean security in terms of their cooperation between South Korea and the U.S. So I think that basically the South Koreans' belief in the strength of the ROK-U.S. alliance is still stable. But to think about the increasing the threats posed by the North Korea in terms of the North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities, many South Koreans are worried about the possibility that the North Korea may attack the South Korea with its nuclear capabilities. So according to the public polls, the many Koreans, probably the majority of the Koreans, South Koreans, want to develop its own nuclear weapons. So it makes the U.S. Think a little bit differently in terms of providing its nuclear umbrella to South Korea. And that's why the South Korea and the U.S. want to have the higher levels of the nuclear assurance or nuclear umbrella, probably a Washington Declaration today. So basically, I still believe that many Koreans, South Koreans, believe that the ROK-U.S. alliance is strong, and we should be okay in terms of protecting ourselves from the nuclear threat posed by North Korea. But still, there's a concern that we need to have a higher or the better the device or the better means in terms of the protecting ourselves from the North Korean nuclear threats. That's why we are focusing on the providing having the higher levels of the nuclear assurance in terms of the cooperation between the two countries, South Korea and the U.S.
Right, and as you mentioned, Professor Min, a poll earlier this month by the Asan Institute for Policy Studies showed more than 64% of the public here in South Korea believe South Korea should develop its own nuclear arsenal. Do you share this outlook?
Personally, it could be a way of protecting ourselves from the North Korea's nuclear threats. But having our own nuclear weapons comes with many limitations or the shortcomings. If we want to have our own nuclear weapons, we need to violate the worldwide NPT rules. It means that we will be kind of outlier in terms of that kind of the international rule. So we'll face the larger penalties in terms of the violating laws. And there's no exception from the United States. And we are the free trade country, which means that we needed to continue to have the trade in terms of feeding ourselves. But if we want to have the nuclear weapons and want to violate the worldwide rule, then we will have the lots of limitations or the economic sanctions, like what Russia, North Korea, and other authoritarian regimes experience now. So it's no good, no use or no good in terms of having just a nuclear weapon in terms of the North Korean nuclear the threat. Because we got the much higher or heavier the sanctions or the penalties from the international community. So I don't buy it, because we may have some kind of the psychological relief in terms of having nuclear weapons, but in terms of our daily lives, we'll have the much higher, the tougher the challenges just having just one nuke.
Right. Professor Kim, prior to his summit with U.S. President Joe Biden, President Yoon Suk-yeol announced quite a number of investment deals with American firms. Now, broadly speaking, how do efforts to broaden and deepen bilateral ties look to affect private business ventures between the two countries?
So for business, it's very important to have government policy and regulatory firm projection in a long-term aspect, because the investments that both countries will make to each other is in large, in the check, and also very important as a long-term strategy. So we need to ensure that stability as an economic alliance. So the role of presidents in the summit is to set the climate of the agreement that both countries will work together very, very closely to ensure that the business of each countries can prosper by investing into a long-term relationship. So I think that in that way, in that sense, this summit is very, very important, because we are confirming that U.S. and Korea are entering and is elevating our economic security as a long-term relationship to ensure that business can stably invest to each other.
Right, and speaking about investment, Professor Kim, the Yoon administration has been pushing very hard to ease the red tape on business-related matters. That being said, does the lifting of bureaucratic red tape look to attract more foreign investment?
So the common pain points of foreign companies in Korea can be summarized in probably 3 points. First, that our corporate tax is too high compared to other countries. And second, that the income tax is very high, so they're requesting a single income tax scheme. Third, for foreign engineers or scientists to work in Korea, they're requesting a tax credit or tax deduction. And according to the survey by the Korean Enterprise Federation, about 74% of the foreign companies said that they will not invest in Korea this year. And for all companies, the biggest pain point was regulation, with 37.8% of the respondents pointing out that regulation is a problem investing in Korea. And also 32.3% of the companies replied that corporate tax is a problem. So compared the corporate tax with other regions, the average of the OECD corporate tax is about 21%, and Singapore is 17%, while we just lowered 1% from 25% to 24% this year. So comparably, we have a very high income corporate tax structure to attract foreign companies to business in Korea stably. So those regulations should be a little bit lifted in order to attract more foreign investment to Korea. But at the same time, we are having a tax reduction. I mean, we have a lower tax this January. About 7,000 billion Korean won was less collected compared to prior years. So it's very hard to lower the income tax and corporate tax as a government agenda. So we're in a very difficult situation. But in a long term, we will have to be more competitive compared to our neighboring Asian countries to attract foreign investment.
It really does sound like a very daunting task at the moment then. Professor Min, another issue on the agenda in the Yoon-Biden summit today is tech tension between the U.S. and China. Simply speaking, Professor Min, what are the implications of U.S. efforts to curb China's acquisition of foreign technology on South Korea?
Well, basically, I think that what U.S. wants from the strategic competition with China in terms of the advanced technology is to delay China's development of the high tech, the capabilities. You know, in terms of the complicating the economic so the structures and the connection between the two countries, it's not possible for the United States to just completely isolate China from the world, the supply chain, unlike the Russian situations in the Cold War. So what U.S. want is to just delay China probably the 5 or 10 years or a couple of years in terms of the advanced technologies. And that period of time should be enough in terms of maintaining U.S. the competitive the superiority over China in terms of advanced technologies. And U.S. wants its core allies and partners like South Korea, Japan, and Germany to work with the United States in terms of curb China, obtaining the high-tech the capabilities. So without the assistance or the cooperation from the U.S. allies and partners, it's not possible for U.S. to completely curb China, obtaining the high-tech capabilities. That's why the U.S. wants South Korea to just stop, or South Korea doesn't provide the high-tech capabilities to China, because the U.S. won't have the kind of the competitive advantages over China in terms of high-tech industries. So it will pose the difficult situations to South Korea, because, as you know, China is a very important trading partner for South Korea, even in the advanced technologies. So our government will face the tough situations in terms of making the difficult decisions in that matter.
Right. Professor Kim, also on the agenda with regard to broader trade talks between Seoul and Washington is the Inflation Reduction Act. Could you tell us a bit about the sticking points within this particular act?
So I think the main points that was addressed during the welcoming ceremony and the pre-talk to the summit was global supply chain, and emphasizing that Korea and U.S. is a blood alliance, according to President Yoon. And President Biden mentioned that Korea and U.S. is the powerhouse for innovation as a partner. So in that line, Inflation Reduction Act is very important in a U.S. standpoint, because they are trying to reshuffle the global supply chain centered to United States by ensuring that very important technologies, such as electrical vehicles, are manufactured in the territory of the United States. So the requirement is to give subsidies for the electrical vehicles and battery industry only if either the company use components that are manufactured in the territory of the United States, more than 50%, or they use materials mined in the United States, or their United States FTA partners, more than 40%. But unfortunately, Hyundai Motors and LG Energy Solution, Hyundai Motors did not qualify for that subsidy because they could not meet the 50% component target and the 40% material target according to the Inflation Reduction Act. So this summit has a very difficult dialogue to negotiate with the United States of having it a little bit easy on Korean companies about the Inflation Reduction Act requirements as an economic alliance.
What about the U.S. CHIPS Act, Professor
Yes.
Kim? The sticking points there, I understand. One, for example, is the need to disclose to the U.S. corporate information, sensitive corporate information. Could you tell us a bit more?
So it's again about the subsidies issue. So U.S. will provide a maximum of $150 million US dollar in subsidy for semiconductors companies that manufacture in the United States. However, there are very strict requirements that if their profit exceeds the $150 million US dollar subsidies, then they're targeted to a 75% tax of the surplus of that subsidies. And in order to monitor that, they're requiring companies to submit the accounting reports. And not only that, the 10 largest trading partners and also have access to their facilities to ensure the U.S. government can investigate on the quantities manufactured and things like that. And Korean companies such as Samsung Electronics or SK Hynix is considering that it's a little bit too much because there's a potential that very important and sensitive business secrets or technological secrets can be revealed in that process. So that's also a very important point that we have to negotiate during this summit to lower the standards for the CHIPS and Science Act.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Min, with regard to Korea, South Korea's, that is, foreign affairs policy, do you believe that the country perhaps is moving away from its policy of strategic ambiguity? And if so, what looks to be the broader consequences of this particular move?
Well, the strategic ambiguity was possible for South Korea in the past because there was clear distinction between security and economy, mainly in terms of the two world powers like the U.S. and China. Specifically, it was possible to say the U.S. for security, China for economy in the past. But in terms of the U.S. efforts to reshape the global supply chain and try to have the reshoring in terms of bringing back the manufacturing facility to the United States. So the world economy is focused on moving toward the United States. So we are experiencing a little bit different situations in terms of the economic structures, economic compositions in the world. So it's not possible for now to say that the security for U.S., economy for China. So now many people say that the security for U.S. and economy for the world, not China. So the U.S. is reshaping the economic map or the composition now. So we need to have a little different strategy in terms of adjusting ourselves to the new economic or the trade environment. So we need to have a little bit different the strategy, like we need to based on our own national interests. And based on our national interest, we need to have the specific tactics to deal with the U.S. and China and other trading partners. So, for example, if we have some kind of the economic conflict or the little bit different economic interest with the United States, then we needed to argue, or we need to show our own position about that to the United States. Like oh, I'm sorry, U.S., we are a very close friend of you, but in terms of our own national interest or our economic the benefits or the interest, or our companies in our territory, we can't accept what you want. Like and the same principle can be applied to when we deal with the Chinese government and the Chinese companies. So now we need to have a little bit different strategy based on our own national interest, and we need to secure our own strategic autonomy when we deal with our allies and the partners and other trading companies. That's the only way I believe that we can survive in the changing trading and the security environment.
Right, and also in the long term, perhaps then. Professor Kim, the Yoon administration has also highlighted, of course, the importance of economic security with the U.S. Do you believe that this form of security on the economic front is crucial? I mean, we have had some pundits talking about how it's important first to talk about what is economic security. What are your thoughts?
I think it's very important because we are living in a digital economy, and Korea and U.S. are the leaders in the tech industry, in the global economy. So the cooperation of Korea and U.S. in the digital economy ensures the prosperity of two countries. So it's not just about alliance, it's not just about economic alliance, it's about creating a technological regime together between Korea and United States, collaborating in the semiconductor industry, clean energy industry, and bio and space, more on to discuss during this summit. So in that sense, I think that it's not only an agenda from the US or Korea solely. Korea has advanced as one of the very most important economic partners of the United States over the 70 years of the Korea-US alliance. So this summit symbolizes how important Korea positions in the technological leadership in the global economy. And in that sense, the economic security between two countries is crucial for the further race to win the technological regime of the digital economy.
Right. Professor Min, prior to his summit with President Joe Biden, President Yoon Suk-yeol floated the idea of arming Ukraine, and he also claimed the tensions between China and Taiwan are of global concern. Speaking within your capacity as a scholar, as a professor, how do you respond to these remarks?
Well, basically, our government has got the consistent principles in terms of dealing with the Ukraine war and the issues of the Taiwan Strait or the Taiwan issues. And basically, our government has got the stable or the consistent opinion that we don't provide any kind of killing the military weapons to the combating the countries, including Russia and Ukraine. And but the President Yoon got the interview with the foreign correspondents, and the main purpose of that kind of interview is to kind of just advertise the upcoming ROK-U.S. summit to the world, the correspondents or the newspaper companies. It's kind of the public diplomacy thing. But so I think that the President Yoon talked about the many various issues in the upcoming summit, including North Korean issues, economic security, and the high-tech industry cooperation, and the human exchange between the two countries, and global issues like Ukraine war, and the issue of Taiwan. And among them, he got a very interesting question of the future situation with some kind of the other conditions, like what if when the South Korea could possibly provide the military weapons to the Ukraine or something like that, and President Yoon responded to that kind of question with the condition: if we see the situation of the kind of the massive the civilian casualties and the serious violation of the international law, then we may consider, South Korea may consider another option in terms of the helping Ukraine to get out of the war, including the providing military weapons. So his remarks, the response was based on some kind of the conditions, or like the serious situations, which means that currently we don't have that kind of serious situations, so we don't consider any kind of providing the military weapons to Ukraine. But interestingly, but sadly, the foreign correspondent just excluded, omitted that kind of condition, and just wrote the article that the South Korea may provide the killing or the military weapons to Ukraine under the current situation. So we got some kind of miscommunications, or the kind of taking advantage of the kind of the response by the foreign correspondents. So then I'm really sorry to see the situation. And similar situations with the issue of Taiwan. Okay, so our president just repeated our government opinions about that kind of sensitive issue, but But China was overreacted to that kind of the universal and universal response by our president. So I don't think that the President Yoon thought that kind of the controversial situations, just repeating what South Korea government has got so far in terms of those issues. So I think that we need to little bit step back a little bit and try to see the situations a little bit differently, and then we can see that our South Korean government, the opinions or the situations haven't changed at all, and I will see it those kind of the opinions even in the upcoming joint statements. And as you know, the two leaders, President Yoon and President Biden, are talking about the various issues in the summit, and definitely they will talk about how the two allies would work together to deal with the Ukrainian war and issue of Taiwan. And I expect that we will just reconfirm what we saw in the past joint statements.
Right, and hopefully details of that will be shared in a few minutes when we join live the joint press conference, of course. And in the meantime, then, Professor Kim, given the current geopolitical developments, there have been growing calls for Seoul to seek a balanced approach with regard to its security ties with the U.S. and, of course, economic ties with China. What do you say?
So I think what was really important in the remarks of President Yoon during the welcoming ceremony and the pre-talk of the summit was value alliance. He was emphasizing that U.S. and Korea share a value of freedom. So I think that this implicitly means that it is very important to cooperate among countries that share the common market economy and democracy, such as U.S. and Japan and other nations that share the value. So I think that was the point that President Yoon was emphasizing. But unfortunately, just for the semiconductor business, 54% of our sales are associated to the export to China. So China is not a partner that we can ignore as a business partner. So we're in a very difficult situation, seeking for our national interest. And during this situation, the United States is requiring Korea to participate in their global supply chain reshuffle plan, summarized as IRA or Chips and Science Act. Diplomatics is a give and take relationship. So the best strategy that we can see is to ensure that we would follow the IRA and the CHIP Act in some way, but with a delayed grace period and with a enlightened provision. And in return, U.S. will be lighter in our action to constantly build business relationships with China. For example, the requirements of the United States is very firm in preventing Korea or prohibiting Korea to export the very important equipment for the semiconductor industry in China. And they're also requiring that Korea not to fill the shortage of demand if U.S. pose a sanction to semiconductor companies against the exports to China. For example, U.S. even is providing sanctions to their own companies, such as Micron, to export to China under the CHIP Act. About $30.8 billion of Micron is associated to the export to China. That is about 25% of their sales. But U.S. is very, very firm that even for their semiconductor companies should follow their guidelines. And in that sense, they're requesting Korean companies not to fill that shortage in supply to China. So it's a very difficult situation, but I hope that the Yoon and Biden summit can sort out a lot of things in the best interest of Korea.
Right, hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Now, meanwhile, for those of you who are joining us live at this particular hour, it's a little after 2:30 here in South Korea, and we are waiting for the joint press conference to be held by Presidents Yoon Suk-yeol and Joe Biden following their summit talks. We have been told that the press conference will begin in a few minutes, but as you can see on the screen, we have yet to see the leaders approach the podium. It's a beautiful day in Washington, D.C., if I may say so myself. A beautiful day for a summit, as some of my colleagues have been saying earlier on. Among the issues addressed today were those regarding security, regional security, as well as the broader security, including the international community. I've been told that we still have to wait for a few more minutes. So in that time then, Professor Min, perhaps we can talk a bit more about today's summit. Let's touch upon the significance, Professor Min, of this state visit extended to President Yoon Suk-yeol by President Joe Biden. Now, President Yoon is the first leader from the Asia-Pacific region, that is, to have been invited on a state visit to the U.S. What are your thoughts on this? Well,
it's a pleasure. It's my pleasure to hear that the South Korea is the first Asian Pacific country to pay a state visit to the United States under the Biden administration. It proves that South Korea is getting more important to the United States in the security and the economic matters. As you know, the Biden administration want to restore its global leadership with the cooperation with its core allies and partners in the world. And in the Pacific, the region is the #1 region in terms of strategic consideration of the Biden administration. In this region, in the Pacific region, as you know, the South Korea and Japan and Australia, they are the top 3 allies for the United States. And in the region, in the Pacific region, the U.S. wanted to track the rise of China. That's the original strategic consideration of the United States, and worldwide the strategic concern of the United States. And in terms of the tracking the rise of China, the U.S. wanted to work together with the allies and partners. And they are focused on the checking the rise of China in terms of high-tech industry, the advanced technologies. So but the Biden administration realized that the high-tech industries and advanced technologies, those manufacturing capabilities have been focused on the East Asian region, like China, South Korea, Taiwan, and possibly Japan. So the U.S. wanted, the Biden administration wanted to reshuffle or reshape the global supply chain, mainly in terms of the advanced technologies like semiconductors or the large volume batteries. So it requires South Korea to work closely together with the United States, because South Korea is probably the only one country who got the manufacturing capabilities in those important high-tech industries. So the importance of South Korea is getting higher and deeper in Washington. So this state visit of South Korea to the United States shows that kind of importance of the value of South Korea to the United States. I'm so glad to see this kind of situation. And in terms of that kind of strategic consideration, the South Korea, the U.S. cooperation and coordination will continue and strengthen in the coming years and months and years.
Right, and hopefully we'll hear more about such cooperation during the joint press conference to be held in a few minutes by President Yoon Suk-yeol and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden. You are seeing on our screen scenes of the Rose Garden as members of the media wait for the joint press conference to commence. For those of you joining us right now, it's a little after 2:30 in the morning here in South Korea Thursday, and a beautiful Wednesday afternoon in Washington, D.C., where President Yoon Suk-yeol held his sixth summit, if I may, with his U.S. counterpart, Joe Biden. A lot of the talk today, well, the joint press conference that will be, is expected to focus on security matters, including those of bilateral interests, as well as the broader global interests, as well as economic issues, of course. We are still waiting for that press conference to begin, and perhaps we have time for one more question with our Professor Kim as we wait. Professor Kim, simply speaking, does South Korea have more to gain, both in terms of economy and security, by bolstering its ties with the U.S. and neighboring Japan?
That's a very difficult question.
It is.
It is a difficult question, but I would say that in diplomatics, we give one and take one. So I think that this summit can be summarized in a nutshell: trading, security, and economic values. So U.S. is requesting Korea to participate in their global supply chain plan by investing more in the high-tech industry to onshore to United States. For example, build more semiconductor factories, EV factories, etc. Then what is our take? That will be the question in the diplomatic talk. They are suggesting that they will provide a regular deployment of nuclear ballistic submarines. So nuclear ballistic submarines are the last resort of defense in any warfare situations. So it's very symbolic of emphasizing the climate of the U.S. and Korea and U.S. alliance. So that's the give and take that we are seeing as the core discussion of the summit, in my opinion. Of course, U.S. companies are investing, agreeing and promising to invest large check sizes to Korea. but it's a joint consideration of seeking mutual benefits in the security and economic domain. So in that sense, we have to consider multiple dimensions to evaluate this summit. It cannot be solely understood in an economic domain, and it can be solely understood in a diplomatic domain. This is a joint consideration between an economic and diplomatic arrangement as a next level of diplomatic alliance. So in that sense, I would say that we will have to be really, really strategic in the discussion to give one and at least take one.
Right, of course, a give and take then. Professor, then, as Professor Kim has mentioned, sources have said that the U.S. may be planning to station, if I may use the word, U.S. nuclear-armed submarines in South Korea for the first time probably in about more than 40 years. In that scenario then, do you see North Korea perhaps escalating its provocations in response to such a move by the U.S.?
Yes, absolutely. I expect that North Korea will definitely aggressively respond to that kind of the decision by the two allies, and it will take advantage of that kind of situation for its own the military capability improvement. And as you know, the North Korea is preparing for the launching ICBM or the satellites probably sooner or later. And it is definitely desperately seeking for the kind of another ground for its own the provocation, like it's like having the exercise for the launching ICBM under the name of us using the space peacefully. So the North Korea will definitely have more fear and concern in terms of deploying the U.S. the strategic assets like the nuclear submarine around the Korean Peninsula, because it's not possible for North Korea to detect that kind of the submarine approach to over the Korean Peninsula in terms of lack of edge technologies or radar technologies. So deploying the strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula is a #1 concern for the Kim Jong-un regime. So whenever U.S. deploys the strategic assets over the Korean Peninsula, you remember that how aggressively North Korea responded to that kind of the military movement toward the other options. So definitely North Korea will aggressively respond.
Professor Min, I'm afraid I'll have to interrupt you. Now, I understand that we have live footage of the joint press conference that is about to begin over in Washington, D.C. We'll come back to you in a little while.
Please be seated. Well, Mr. President, it's good to see you again, my friend. We've met several times over the last year, and each time we have deepened our nation's partnership, and for the benefit, I think, of both our peoples. And today's no exception. Our nation's relationship has been a great success story. The alliance formed in war and has flourished in peace. Seemingly every day, we've launched new areas of cooperation on cyber, strategic technologies, space, democracy, and all the areas that matter most to our future. Because of its core, our alliance is about building a better future for all of our people. And there's no better example than our economic relationship and partnership, which is delivering incredible benefits to both our nations. Through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, we're advancing economic growth grounded in high standards for our workers, for the environment, and for communities throughout the region. We're standing together against economic influence being leveraged in coercive ways. And since I took office, Korean companies have invested more than $100 billion in the United States, driving innovation and spurring good new jobs for Americans and Korean workers. Our mutual defense treaty is ironclad, and that includes our commitment to extended deterrence, and that includes the nuclear threat and the nuclear deterrent. They're particularly important in the face of DPRK's increased threats and a blatant violation of U.S. sanctions. At the same time, we continue to seek serious and substantial diplomatic breakthroughs with the DPRK to bolster stability on the peninsula, reduce the threat of proliferation, and address our humanitarian and human rights concerns for the people of the DPRK. The Republic of Korea and the United States are working together, including through our trilateral cooperation with Japan, to ensure the future of the Indo-Pacific is free, is open, prosperous, and secure. I want to thank you again, Mr. President, for your political courage and personal commitment to diplomacy with Japan. I've worked on these issues for a long time, and I can tell you it makes an enormous difference when we all pull together. I also welcome and support your administration's new Indo-Pacific strategy. It's a strategy that affirms how aligned our two nations are and our visions of the region and how similar they are. Today, we discussed our work together on promoting peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits, ensuring freedom of navigation in the South China Sea and beyond. Excuse me. I also affirmed our shared commitment. We together shared our firm shared commitment to stand with the people of Ukraine against Russia's brutal assault on their freedom, their territorial integrity, and democracy. The Republic of Korea's strong support for Ukraine is important because Russia's flagrant violation of international law matters to nations everywhere in the world, not just in Europe. When it comes right down to it, it's about what you believe, what you stand for, what kind of future you want for your children and grandchildren. And right now, I believe the world's at an inflection point. The choices we make today, I believe, are going to determine the direction of our world and the future of our kids for decades to come. That's why this partnership is so important, Mr. President, because we share the same values, the same vision. And I greatly appreciate, Mr. President, that the Republic of Korea co-chaired the second Summit on Democracies last month, and they will host the third Summit for Democracies. We both understand that our democracies and our people are our greatest source of strength, and working together, they make our nation stronger and more effective. From tracking the climate crisis and strengthening our effort to fight it and strengthening global health, no two countries are better suited to meet the challenges ahead than the Republic of Korea and the United States. I want to thank you again, Mr. President, for your friendship, your partnership, and all you've done to help build a future of shared strength and success. The floor is yours, Mr. President.
President Biden, thank you for your special and warm hospitality. I am very pleased to be making a state visit to the United States during this meaningful year that marks the 70th anniversary of the ROK-U.S. alliance. Our two countries have overcome challenges and crises during the past 70 years based on the deep roots of freedom and democracy, building a value alliance that is strong, resilient, and sustainable. We are now being threatened by an unprecedented polycrisis. The ROK-U.S. alliance is jointly overcoming this crisis, also coming from North Korea, as a righteous alliance that contributes to world peace and prosperity. We will further expand the depth and denotation of the ROK-U.S. Global Comprehensive Strategic Partnership and march forward to the future. Today, President Biden and myself engaged in constructive dialogue to discuss ways to materialize this shared vision. The outcome of our dialogue is well outlined in the joint statement adopted today. The first key outcome is extended deterrence. Sustainable peace on the Korean Peninsula does not happen automatically. Our two leaders have decided to significantly strengthen extended deterrence of our two countries against North Korea's nuclear and missile threats so that we can achieve peace through the superiority of overwhelming forces and not a false peace based on the goodwill of the other side. Such a will and commitment is captured in the Washington Declaration. President Biden has reaffirmed his ironclad commitment to extended deterrence towards the Republic of Korea. Our two countries have agreed to immediate bilateral presidential consultations in the event of North Korea's nuclear attack and promised to respond swiftly, overwhelmingly, and decisively using the full force of the alliance, including the United States nuclear weapons. Our two countries have agreed to establish a nuclear consultative group to map out a specific plan to operate the new extended deterrence system. Now, our two countries will share information on nuclear and strategic weapon operations plans in response to North Korea's provocations and have regular consultations on ways to plan and execute joint operations that combine Korea's state-of-the-art conventional forces with the U.S.'s nuclear capabilities, the results of which will be reported to the leaders of our two countries on a regular basis. In addition, our two countries have agreed to further advance tabletop exercises against a potential nuclear crisis. In addition, deployment of the United States strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula will be made constantly and routinely. President Biden and I will continue to cooperate to strengthen extended deterrence between our two countries based on our historical and concrete agreement reached during our summit. Second, our two leaders have agreed to further strengthen the strategic partnership in economic security, which is directly related to the national economies of our two countries. President Biden and I welcomed the expansion of our firms' bilateral mutual investment in advanced technology, including semiconductors, electric vehicles, and batteries. President Biden has said that no special support and considerations will be spared for Korean companies' investment and business activities in particular. We have agreed to consult and coordinate closely so that the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Science Act can further strengthen supply chain cooperations between the two countries in advanced technology.
Furthermore, we plan on ramping up partnerships in cutting-edge technology. We have agreed to establish a dialogue for next-generation emerging and core technology between the U.S. National Security Council and the Korea Office of National Security pertaining to chips, batteries, biotechnology, quantum science, and other cutting-edge technologies with the aim of promoting joint R&D and experts exchange. We have also adopted a separate joint statement for strengthening cooperation in the rapidly emerging quantum science and technology domain. President Biden and I have also agreed to get the ball rolling on discussions about expanding our alliance into cyber and space by applying the Mutual Defense Treaty in cyberspace and space as well. We have also agreed that the strategic cybersecurity cooperation framework adopted this time around will serve as the foundation on which we address cyber threats together and boost cooperation in information sharing, collection, and analysis. Space is another area that shows great promise for cooperation between our two countries. During my time here, I was able to visit the NASA Goddard Space Center. President Biden welcomed the establishment of CASA, and we have agreed to promote cooperation between CASA and NASA. We have also agreed to accelerate discussions on reaching a reciprocal defense procurement agreement, which is equivalent to an FTA in terms of national defense. Meanwhile, President Biden and I have agreed to promote exchange between the future generations of our two countries. To this end, we have launched the U.S. ROK Special Exchange Initiative for Youths. In celebration of the 70th anniversary of the ROK-U.S. alliance this year, our two countries plan to invest a total of $60 million to support exchanges between 2,023 youths majoring in STEM, humanities, and social sciences. This also includes the largest Fulbright program to date, which will provide scholarships for 200 students. Last but not least, President Biden and I have agreed that South Korea and the United States, as key partners in achieving stability and building peace in the Indo-Pacific region, will put our heads together as we implement our Indo-Pacific strategies to strengthen our cooperation in addressing regional and global challenges. In particular, President Biden expressed strong support for efforts made by the Korean government to normalize Korea-Japan relations. And we have agreed to continue our efforts in strengthening Korea-U.S.-Japan trilateral cooperation. Furthermore, we reaffirmed that the use of force to take the lives of innocent people, an example of which would be Russia's invasion of Ukraine, can in no circumstances whatsoever be justified. In that sense, we agreed to continue our cooperation and efforts alongside the international community to support Ukraine. During this meeting, we also discussed plans through which our two countries can take a leadership role in addressing global challenges such as climate change, international development, and energy and food security. I am delighted that through today's meeting, we've opened up a new chapter for the next 70 years of the ROK-U.S. alliance. I hope President Biden and I, with the support of people in our two countries, can fully deliver on the blueprint that we have mapped out today with the aim of our founded in the reaffirmation of the value of freedom and our universal values. Thank you.
Now we're going to take some questions. The first question is from Courtney of the Los Angeles Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your top economic priority has been to build up U.S. domestic manufacturing in competition with China. But your rules against expanding chip manufacturing in China is hurting South Korean companies that rely heavily on Beijing. Are you damaging a key ally in the competition with China to help your domestic politics ahead of the election? And one for President Yoon. There have been concerns since last year that North Korea will soon be conducting its 7th nuclear test amid growing domestic support in your country for your own nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, Russia has suggested it could send its latest weapons to North Korea if South Korea sends lethal aid to Ukraine. How do you seek to manage the North Korea risk amid obligations to Ukraine and NATO? Thank you.
Let me respond to your question first. My desire to increase U.S. manufacturing and jobs in America is not about China. I'm not concerned about China. Remember, America invented the semiconductor. We invented it. We used to have 40% of the market. And we decided that what we're going to do over the past, I don't know how many decades, we decided that it was going to be cheaper to export jobs and import product. And along came the pandemic. And the pandemic taught us that we used to have, as I said, 40% of the market just some years ago. Now it's down to 10%. And again, we invented the supercomputer. So I decided to go out and see what we could do to increase our hold on the market once again. And so what I did was I went around the country, as well as in addition to passing the CHIPS and Science Act, I, in fact, visited countries around the world. And two significant South Korean companies decided they were going to invest billions of dollars in chip manufacturing in the United States. It wasn't designed to hurt China. It was designed so we didn't have to worry about whether or not we had access to semiconductors. For example, during the pandemic, what happened was all of a sudden everybody started to learn the phrase supply chain. A year ago, no one knew what the hell everybody was talking about when he said supply chain. But now they all know. And we lost access to these semiconductors, in which new automobiles in the United States need 30,000 of them just to build a new automobile. And we didn't have them. So we started to invest here. And what happened was when we encouraged the investment through the CHIPS and Science Act, and now we have enormous investment in the United States, well over $200 billion in long-term investment in semiconductors. And we're rebuilding the economy of the United States with those semiconductors. It's not designed to hurt China. The only thing I did say with regard to China, there are certain extremely sophisticated semiconductors that we have built that are useful for nuclear and/or other weapon systems. Those we are not selling. We're not exporting to China or anyone else. And so that's the context in which this has all occurred. In the meantime, we've created thousands of jobs and bringing back a sense of pride and dignity to so many towns in the country where all of a sudden, over the last 3 decades, we found out that factory that had 600 people shut down. The soul of that community was lost. And so I made sure when the semiconductors were coming back that they were not just going to go to the coast, they'd be all over the country. And so we have a significant field of dreams outside of in Ohio, outside of Columbus. We're in Texas, we're in Arizona, anyway, they're all over the country. So it's not viewed to hurt anyone else. We are providing access to those semiconductors. We're a supply chain you can count on. But we are not going to sit back and be in a position where we don't have access to those semiconductors. We are not going to be a place where we're the end of that line. We're the beginning of it. And it's generating significant economic growth in America and not hurting anybody. And by the way, it's creating jobs in South Korea. It's creating jobs in South Korea, not just with SK, but anyway, with Samsung and other industries. So I think it's a win-win.
With regard to your question, let me provide my answer. Korea and the U.S., based on its Washington Declaration, our two countries have agreed to strengthen extended deterrence, and the implementation level is different from the past. First of all, we have an NCG, Nuclear Consultative Group, that has been launched that will implement discussions and actions, and we will hold regular meetings and consultations under NCG. We will share information on mutual nuclear assets and intelligence, and we will jointly plan responses and also jointly plan exercises and drills and implementation plans. So all of these will be strengthened and specified under the Nuclear Consultative Group. We want to customize our response against North Korea's nuclear threat based on extended deterrence. And in the process of achieving this goal, any concerns that Koreans may have against North Korean nuclear weapons will be relieved, I believe. If nuclear weapons are used, our two countries will strengthen our response in a swift manner. Any further questions to me? Please. Reporter 1 from One NTN. I have two questions for you. With regard to extended deterrence, the NCG that has been formed, how will Korea function under NCG? Any kind of nuclear-equipped nuclear assets will be in function? And to President Biden, Korea is to maintain the NPT and it is to strengthen extended deterrence, correct? So based on your view, do you think this is enough to guard Korea against the North Korean nuclear threat? Thank you very much.
Well, let me address your question about the activities of the NCG. We are going to be sharing information and we are going to be acting jointly. That is the key. I can't talk to the specifics right now about what type of information and what type of specific activities we will be conducting. But however, under the nuclear umbrella, our extended deterrence was a lot lower. So right now, it's an unprecedented expansion and strengthening of the extended deterrence strategy under the Washington Declaration, which will create the NCG. The implementation and the response at this level has never thus far been this strong. So this is a new level of extended deterrence, much stronger, that I can say with confidence.
The response that I would give you is that the extended deterrence means that we are having more consultation with whatever action is to be contemplated or taken. And we made it really very, very clear. The ROK has repeatedly confirmed its commitment to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Washington Declaration is a prudent step to reinforce extended deterrence and respond to advancing DPRK nuclear threat. Look, a nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies or partisans or partners is unacceptable and will result in the end of whatever regime were to take such an action. And it's about strengthening deterrence in response to DPRK's escalatory behavior and to deal in complete consultation. And, the idea that I have absolute authority as Commander-in-Chief and the sole authority to use a nuclear weapon, but, what the declaration means is that we're going to make every effort to consult with our allies when it's appropriate, if any action is so called for. Certainly, we talked about this and some other things today, but the bottom line here is there's even closer cooperation, closer consultation, and we're not going to be stationing nuclear weapons on the peninsula, but we will have ports visits of nuclear submarines and things like that. We are not walking away from that. My turn to ask a question. I think the next question is Mary Bruce, ABC.
Thank you, Mr. President. You recently launched your re-election campaign. You've said questions about your age are legitimate, and your response is always, just watch me. But the country is watching, and recent polling shows that 70% of Americans, including a majority of Democrats, believe you shouldn't run again. What do you say to them? What do you say to those Americans who are watching and aren't convinced? You've said you can beat Trump again. Do you think you're the only one?
I may not be the only one, but I know him well, and I know the danger he presents to our democracy, and we've been down this road before. And with regard to age, and polling data, I notice the polling data I keep hearing about is that I'm between 42 and 46% favorable rating, et cetera. And But everybody running for re-election in this time has been in the same position. There's nothing new about that. You're making it sound like Biden's really underwater. Number one. Number two, when the same polling data asks whether they think what kind of job I've done, it gets overwhelmingly positive results, from 58% thinking everything from the CHIPS Act and all the things we've done. You know, we've created, like I said, we've created 12 million new jobs. We've created 800,000 manufacturing jobs. We have economic growth moving. We're in a situation where the climate, we've invested more money and more help in dealing with the climate crisis than any nation in the world. And so things are moving. And the reason I'm running again is there's a job to finish. The other thing is that, look, you know, think about what I inherited when I got elected. I inherited a nation in overwhelming debt at the time, number one, in the hole for the 4 years that he was president. I inherited a nation that had a serious loss of credibility around the world as America first. And, you know, the first meeting I attended the G7, I said, America's back. And one of the world leaders looked and said, for how long? For how long? There's a great concern about the United States being able to lead the free world. And we're doing that again. And those same polls you look at, you take a look at the polls, they're saying whether I pull together NATO and the European Union as well as Asian partners, I think we have. But there's more to do. And with regard to age, I can't even say, I guess how old I am, I can't even say the number. It doesn't register with me. And but the only thing I can say is that one of the things that people are going to find out is they're going to see a race and they're going to judge whether or not I have it or don't have it. I respect them taking a hard look at it. I take a hard look at it as well. I took a hard look at it before I decided to run. And I feel good. I feel excited about the prospects. And I think we're on the verge of really turning the corner in a way we haven't in a long time. I know you're tired of hearing me say we're at an inflection point. Well, we really are. What happens in the next 2, 3, 4 years is going to determine what the next 3, 4 decades look like. And I have never been more optimistic in my life about the possibilities of the United States.
To be clear, though, you just said, I know him well. Did Donald Trump's decision to run affect yours? Would you be running if he wasn't?
Yeah, I think I still would be running if he wasn't. I do know him well. He's not hard to know, as you know. You know him well, too. The question is whether or not, look, there's more to finish the job. We have an opportunity to put ourselves in a position where we are economically and politically secure for a long time. Look, we continue to have, and no, you don't like me hear me saying it, there's still a contest between autocracies and democracies. And we're the leading democracy in the world. And it's something I know a fair amount about, something I care about, and something that I have found a willingness of an awful lot of our allies and friends to follow. So I think that, we have to finish the job and nail it down.
You need to repeat the question. The mic was not used. We could not interpret.
They need to repeat the question.
Please use the microphone. We cannot provide interpretation if you did not use the microphone.
My apologies. Thank you. Did the recent leaks revealing that the U.S. was spying on South Korea come up at all in your discussions? And did President Biden provide you any assurances?
With regard to that, we are communicating between our two countries and we are sharing necessary information. I believe that investigation is underway in the United States. So various and complex variables are always in play. We need time to wait for the investigation results by the United States, and we plan to continue to communicate on the matter.
This will be the last question.
예, 질문 주셔서 감사합니다.
I'm from Financial News. My name is Kim Hak-jae. My question goes to both of you. My first one goes to President Yoon first. During this state visit, you've said that the alliance has strengthened to cutting-edge industries, to cutting-edge science, and also investments in businesses have been some of the outcomes. These are some positives. However, to each individual of the public, how will this have a long-term impact? What will be the direct benefits felt? And to President Biden. In celebration of the 70th anniversary of the ROK-U.S. alliance, I know that the atmosphere is really positive. However, Korean businesses, especially because of the CHIPS Act and the IRA, are on edge. What message can you send to the Korean companies to really make sure and tell them that this is not something to worry about? The technology cooperation between the ROK and the U.S. and also in partnerships in cutting-edge industries and science and technology was your first question. So that is about really strengthening the competitiveness of our two countries. And it will enhance the productivity and create added value, high added value. These are the types of products that are going to be produced. And from the perspective of the public, for each individual, in that process, they will reap the benefits wide and comprehensive that will stem from these industries and investments in these industries, for example, from job creation as well. And above all, the future generations will be given the determination and will to take on new challenges and embrace opportunities in our industry so that they can continue to prosper and grow and become more abundant in the future.
The reassurance is that it's overwhelmingly in our interest for Korea to do well. No, it is. It's very much in America's interest that Korea do well in the Pacific, very well, because they are one of our most valued partners. And so I think the combination of growing democracies and the democratic institutions as well as their economies is overwhelming in the benefit of the United States, whether it is in South Korea or it's in Australia, in the deep South Pacific. And so I think that there's a reason, overwhelming reason. Plus, in addition to that, we're increasing the number of student exchanges, access to more information between our folks, educating our people, as well as we're going to be cooperating in everything from space to technology to medicine. And so there's so many opportunities we have. And I don't think at least we don't, and I don't think so far, most of the South Korean companies believe that there's somehow a U.S. effort to slow them down, prevent their growth, or anything like that. We'd like to see them grow. And I mean that sincerely. It's overwhelming in U.S. interest for South Korea to do very well economically. It's overwhelming in our interest because it has. And then lastly, I think we underestimate the example that South Korea sets. Here you have a nation that is significant, but is not a nation of 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 people making the kind of changes it's making. It gives other smaller nations hope to believe that if they have democratic institutions and commitment and impact on industries that in fact are the cutting edge industries, new sciences and technology, including AI and other things, that there's a future for them. And I think that's what this is about. And so we view South Korea's economic growth as a benefit to the United States as well as freedom around the world. Thank you all so very much. Appreciate it.
Distinguished guests, please remain in your seats until the official delegations have departed.
Right, that was the joint press conference by Presidents Yoon Suk-yeol and Joe Biden at the White House following their summit on mutual security and economic interests. I now have my colleague Yoon Jung-min standing by live in Washington, D.C. at our makeshift news studio. Jung-min, welcome.
Hi, Sunny. It must be very late at night there.
Right, actually it's really early in the morning here, a little after 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, there in DC, I see the weather is looking really beautiful, and we're looking ahead, Chongmin, at a host of issues touched upon by the two leaders, right?
That is right, Sunny. So many issues to talk about, ranging from the Allies' nuclear consultative group to economic cooperation. Well, without further ado, let's bring in an expert to discuss exactly that. I'm joined by Mr. Bruce Klinger, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So President Yoon and Biden met for 80 minutes, I believe. So we just heard from the two leaders. So first of all, what were your major takeaways from the joint press conference? Briefly.
I think really just the expanse of topics that they covered. It's not only military, but also diplomatic for not only the relations with Japan, the deterrence of North Korea, but really globally. A lot of economic initiatives, now new groups on cyber and space cooperation. So I think when we see the joint statement, it's going to be very lengthy because it's covering a lot of areas of cooperation between Washington and Seoul.
Right, and specifically, this time the allies have agreed to create a nuclear consultative group for extended deterrence. We heard President Yoon saying consultations will be made immediately at the leader level if there's any nuclear attack by North Korea, and the U.S. is going to deploy more U.S. strategic assets more often on the Korean Peninsula. How do you assess the joint posture, the Washington declaration unveiled by the two leaders today?
I think it's very positive. What we've been hearing from the South Korean government is a desire to have a greater involvement in discussion, information sharing, planning on the U.S. Use of nuclear weapons. And I think the Biden administration has delivered on that, not only in the statement today, but the last several months. When I was in Seoul in January, I was hearing concerns from the government. And the last discussions I've had, there's a much greater sense of reassurance because of actions that the U.S. has taken in the last several months for greater transparency on nuclear-related military operations.
And how do you think North Korea could respond to this?
I think they'll respond in the way they have. They will then often do things that they were going to do anyway. They'll likely have very strong, strident propaganda messages blaming the U.S. and South Korea for heightened tensions, though only North Korea is the one violating UN resolutions. They may do missile launches, they may do military exercises, but they were likely going to do those anyway.
Unfortunately, Mr. Klinger, and President Biden again today, and President Yoon emphasized cooperation for the Indo-Pacific region. This comes apparently against its competition with Beijing and there's Russian invasion in Ukraine. So where do you think that leaves the allies' foreign policy?
I think there's much greater coordination, not only between the U.S. and South Korea on regional roles, but really amongst other allies and partners of the United States in the region. We've seen President Yoon released his country's first Indo-Pacific strategy in December, very expansive, not directly critical of China as other nations such as Japan and Australia have been, but it really, I think, puts some meat to the bones of President Yoon's pledge for South Korea to assume a larger role in the region. So we'll have to see to what degree he implements that. I think he will do more than his predecessors, but it's never going to be couched as anti-China actions. So it may be harder to discern how his policies are different. So I think perhaps if on the anniversary of the release of his Indo-Pacific strategy, if he were to release a report card on the things that South Korea has done in the past year, it would make it easier for us to see how his policy is different and how much broader South Korea's role has been in the Indo-Pacific.
Today, President Biden was vocal of the Russian aggression of Ukraine, and President Yoon renewed today his support for aid for Ukraine. Do you see South Korea moving slightly away from its strategic ambiguity, and what can Seoul gain from a change in its foreign policy?
Well, more broadly on strategic ambiguity, President Yoon, Foreign Minister Park Jin have said strategic ambiguity is dead. It's replaced by strategic clarity. I think that was more focused on the Indo-Pacific region, and you know, in the past, South Korea has often tried to balance its relations with China and the United States. When it comes to Ukraine, I think South Korea has been very forward-leaning in providing lethal assistance to the United States and to Poland and other nations, which can then be sort of backfilled into supporting the Ukraine, while still saying that they're not providing any direct aid. I think at some point in the near future, South Korea is going to need to step up, like other nations have done, and uphold and defend the policies of freedom and democracy, regardless of whether authoritarian regimes like Russia, North Korea, or China are angered by that. You need to stand up if you're going to really be a global pivotal state.
What are the chances that South Korea officially joins the Quad or the G7 and becomes G8?
I think it's still perhaps an uphill battle, but really joining those sort of bigger bureaucracies are not necessarily important. It's really getting the job done or getting the mission done. So the Quad is not really a security organization. So South Korea, in conjunction with the U.S., but also just in conjunction with Indo-Pacific nations such as the Pacific Four, the Indo-Pacific Four, can do more on maritime domain awareness or enhancing maritime security without having to create some new organization. They can just do it as multilateral initiatives.
All right. And on the economic front, the two leaders today agreed to take a step further in bolstering their economic cooperation, not just business, but stretching to the realm of high-tech alliance, supply chain, and space. What stands out to you?
I think when we hear about economic security and guaranteeing supply chains, it's an indirect way of saying reducing our reliance on trade with China and their ability to influence nations, even political decisions, given their economic coercion. So, and also during the COVID crisis, we saw how supply chains can be disrupted and how the impact that has on economies. So I think overall there's been a perception and a realization of Chinese coercive economic tactics and the dangers of being overly reliant on Chinese trade. And so, again, in maybe a quiet way, I think Korea, Japan, other nations are trying to move their future business operations away from China towards, if not the United States, other nations in the Indo-Pacific or even Europe.
All right. And I heard you were invited to the White House this morning. Very busy day for you. What was the atmosphere there like ahead of the summit?
I think very festive. There was touches of somberness when there was a discussion of the Korean War, as well as the identification of U.S. veterans who had been killed in action, and some of the remains will soon be returned. But overall, there was a focus not so much on history, but on the coordination and the cooperation today and into the future. And as we've seen, really, it's been a very broad relationship. So for most Americans, maybe that don't focus on Asia, their thought of Korea is the Korean War and the alliance. But really, the relationship is so much more than that. It's economic, it's diplomatic, it's regional, and it's global.
For the future. And before we let you go, so where do you think the South Korea-U.S. relationship stands today?
I think it's very strong. I've been covering Korea for 30 years now. I've seen ups and downs, either because of change of administrations or events in the United States or Korea. I think the last few years we've had a very strong repairing and resurgence of the alliance and the overall relationship. We've resumed our military exercises. We've resumed our rotational deployment of strategic nuclear assets. So we've repaired the degradation of our allied deterrence and defense capabilities. We've taken measures to increase the deterrence of North Korea, which also is intended to increase the reassurance to South Korea of our commitment to the defense of the Korean Peninsula.
Mr. Bruce Klinger from the Heritage Foundation, thank you for your insights.
Well, thank you for having me.
And with that, we now turn back to the Arirang News studio in Seoul. Sunny.
All right, Changmin, thank you very much for that. That was our Yoon Jung-min reporting live from Washington, D.C. And a very big thank you to the rest of our crew there as well. Now, back here in Capital Seoul, Professor Min, what are your thoughts on the details shared during the joint press conference with regard to security?
Well, both the leaders celebrated the enhancing extended deterrence against North Korea's military threats, which is called the Washington Declaration. And I hope that that measure will decrease the South Koreans' the concerns against North Korea's increasing nuclear and missile threats. And then I also hope that the Washington Declaration will be the useful example to maintain the security over the Korean Peninsula and the Asia-Pacific region, including the East Asian region.
Right, hopefully. Professor Kim, how do you respond to details shared during that press conference with regard to bilateral economic interests?
So I think the highlight of, President Biden's message was "We go together," as mentioned in the opening ceremony. And the constant message of President Yoon was value alliance. So I think that we have took sides in this summit in choosing a value alliance to get closer to the countries that share the common value of economic freedom and free market and also democracy. So that was very important in my opinion. To measure the give and takes, I think we both give and took the investment packages, so that's on par. Just to address the things that we have gave, we had to at least follow the IRA sanctions and the chips and science sanctions. But I project that U.S. will not stick to the original provisions to Korean companies, since we had a very, very strong message by both presidents that we will collaborate in dealing with the IRA and chips and science, chips and science acts. So that was a give, but also a take, in my opinion. And the give was that we made a choice in the Chinese relationship. We almost are being really, really clear in which alliance we will join. So I think that was a give. For the take, there was a couple of points that we took. First, I would like to emphasize the space development initiative arranged between the Korean President Yoon and Biden, because we have a plan to establish CASA, which will be our space think tank. And we also are participating in the Artemis project to go to the lunar expedition with the United States. But we are significantly behind the technology in terms of space. So there's a lot that we should cooperate with the U.S. to develop our space technologies. We also have a plan to launch our GPS system by 2035. We're planning to launch 8 satellites. Currently, we have a huge error rate in GPS system. About 15 to 30 meters last year, and with the power of software technology, we are adjusting to 1 meter. But Japan, that already has their own GPS system, has an accuracy error rate of only 6 centimeters. So it's crucial for also U.S. to share those GPS information with us as a long-term security issue and a technology issue to develop these space technologies. So that was a take. And another thing was that we would, cooperate in global leadership, which was declared by President Yoon, that we are emphasizing a global alliance. And during the summit, the message was really clear, revealing what global alliance means. It meant that we would cooperate more in climate change and international development, and even in international relationships for conflicts in Ukraine. So in order to implement these economic exchanges, I think it's really important to discuss U.S. corporations to relocate to Seoul as their Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific HQ among the competition with Singapore and Hong Kong and Tokyo.
I'm sure corporate Korea would love that.
Sure.
Right. Well, as they mentioned, the leaders, they talked about shared values and shared visions. I'm sure we're looking ahead to many more years of strong relationships. Thank you so much, Professor Kim, for your time and your thoughts today. And Professor Min, thank you very much for being with us. It's a little after 3:30 in the morning. Thank you for being with us. Right. Well, on that note, we end this latest edition of Arirang News Special that covered live the joint press conference by President Yoon Suk-yeol and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden at the White House following the latest summit. Thank you for watching.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Good Morning Seoul.
And we're